China is seeking support from other countries to unite against President Trump over his crushing tariff plan. But Beijing met with wariness after years of, quote, coercive economic behavior. That's according to the New York Times. This is the Trump administration says it's negotiating with more than 70 countries as they push for them to limit dealings with China in exchange for tariff reductions. China reportedly open to talks with the U.S., but with many reported stipulations, including the U.S., quote, showing respect and naming a point person to lead negotiations. Let's bring in Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good morning. And I also want to say you have a brand new op-ed on FoxNews.com that just was published within the last hour. You say China's in bad shape and in no condition to sustain this trade war. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, well, they reported 5.4% growth from Q1, but that is ludicrous because we're seeing the price data for March showed China's in a deflationary spiral. You know, CPI down 2 straight months. PPI, factory gate prices, down 30 straight months. That is inconsistent with the notion of a robust economy. Plus, also, they got their debt crisis. Their 2008 in slow motion is occurring now. You got the collapse in the property prices that have already occurred. And the other thing is that Xi Jinping has turned his back on consumption as the basis of the Chinese economy. So his only way out is to export more. President Trump has just closed off the world's biggest consumer market by far. I mean, I don't know what Xi Jinping's going to do because Chinese factories have been closing now, and this is just a crisis for him.
Well, give me the investor perspective on that, Mark, of what he's saying.
All right, so I'm going to get very specific here. So we looked at NVIDIA and AMD yesterday, down 7-ish%. Obviously, the administration barred sale of some of the AI chips that they make to China. What I'm reading now is that Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, just arrived in Beijing, not wearing his typical motorcycle black leather jacket, but instead wearing a suit and tie. Remember, China mentioned that they want respect when it comes to trade. Is there anything we should be reading into that kind of a meeting?
Well, of course, you know, NVIDIA wants to sell more chips to China, and it's allowed a lot of its chips to be sold through China through transshipment through Singapore and other places, which it knew what was going on. You know, shame on them. But the point here is that once the U.S. starts really restricting chip flows to China, China's AI dreams have really run into a lot of turbulence then. And because everyone says that the struggle for the 21st century is AI, China's in trouble there as well.
You know, the New York Times has an op-ed this morning. It's not hard to imagine a Chinese-led global economy. But what you're saying, and Mark's point, flies in the face of what the New York Times is writing.
Yeah, and it flies in the face of the New York Times reporting. You know, it's just common sense that, you know, we have problems with China on trade because of their predatory and criminal trade practices. Well, of course, other countries also have those same problems, even worse than we do. So, you know, China's not going to be able to stitch up this global coalition that everyone's talking about against the U.S. to reorder the trade order. It's not going to happen. If anybody is going to reorder global trade, it's President Trump with all of these deals that he is now stitching together. And that's going to isolate China because remember, Trump said those countries that deal with us first get the best deals. China is at the end of the tail because they are intransigent.
And Japan, who was in D.C., Japan. President Trump is ordering the Commerce Department to launch an investigation into possible tariffs on all U.S. critical mineral imports. This is after China curbed exports of rare earth minerals, which we need for U.S. defense. Xi Jinping's family reportedly holds billion-dollar investments in Chinese rare earth mining plants. And Bloomberg says, they actually said back in 2012, they had an 18% indirect stake in one company, $2 billion in assets, Gordon.
Yes.
Connect the dots with that, if you don't know.
Well, this is the whole issue of corruption. And, you know, the Communist Party likes to say, well, yeah, they're minor officials who are corrupt. But here you're talking at the top of the political system, Cheryl, and it just shows how bad this is. Now, of course, with this export ban or this embargo, you know, we're starting getting, we're starting to get weak in the knees. But we got to remember, China did this to Japan in 2010. And the Chinese embargo collapsed in a couple months because the Japanese found so many ways around it. And we forget one thing. Yes, we need to buy, but the Chinese need to sell. and we're going to get these rare earths one way or the other. We might pay a little bit more, but then again, we might start mining and processing them here, and that's going to be good for the United States.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, when he was on this program with Maria, said exactly that. He said they need us a lot more than we need them, and I'm paraphrasing that. But you know, the other thing is what China just did is with Boeing, and that hurt Boeing's stock because they're telling all these Chinese carriers, don't take delivery of your Boeing orders. That hurts Boeing because they don't get paid until the aircraft is actually delivered.
Right. Boeing will have a little bit of turbulence, but remember, Boeing is going to sell these planes. If China doesn't buy them, they're going to sell them to India, which is actually talking to Boeing about taking these extra planes. There's only so much capacity in the world to build planes. If Airbus sells more to China, and that's a big if, but if they do, Boeing's going to sell to Airbus's customers because Airbus's customers are not going to wait 10 years to get a plane. So this is not going to really hurt Boeing too much in the long run. And if President Trump, if he starts putting an embargo on the sales of parts to China, because that is the natural step, then, you know, you're going to have a lot of planes in China are not going to be flying pretty soon. So, you know, this is not very good for China because they haven't thought this out.
Yeah, Airbus does have more of a hold on the Chinese market than Boeing does. And I know Boeing was looking for the opportunity, but well, here we are. Mehek.
And Gordon, I have to go back to what you start your op-ed with. There are no winners and losers in trade wars, but you're calling China to be a loser today. I want to go to national security implications. We're talking about rare earth minerals. Where can the United States go? Because I think people need to understand what the national security is at stake when we rely on China, and then the United States has options. Can you kind of walk through that?
Yeah, well, we only have one rare earth mine. It's in California. But that production is processed in China. So what we can do, two things. First of all, open up federal lands for mining of rare earths and processing in the United States. Also, Saskatchewan, in our 51st state, you know, they've got minerals up the gazoo. So clearly, there's a lot that we can do here. And so there's just a very simple answer. We just do what the Japanese did in 2010. You know, you start to buy elsewhere. You buy from the Chinese directly because these state enterprises need to sell, and they'll do it surreptitiously. Also, you just find substitutes for rare earths, which the Japanese did.
And the Ukrainians, there's a rare earth mineral story there as well, which President Trump has pursued. Yeah.
Right.
Gordon, it's great to see you as always.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen in El Salvador yesterday calling on Congress to block funding used to pay countries to house deportees. More House Democrats pushing to visit El Salvador to retrieve alleged MS-13 gang member Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The Supreme Court ordered the U.S. to facilitate his release. Trump administration says he was wrongly deported due to an administrative error. Illinois Congresswoman Delia Ramirez reportedly sending a letter to Homeland Security Chair Mark Green asking him to authorize a congressional delegation to El Salvador. Congressman Robert Garcia, Maxwell Frost also pushing for an official trip. Joining us now here in our studio, Pennsylvania Congressman Dan Muser. Congressman, good morning.
Good morning, Cheryl.
So should the U.S. taxpayers be paying for this congressional delegation to go to El Salvador?
This is as close to madness and an upside-down world as it gets. Here we have illegal immigrants en masse that are still in our country. Fortunately, with President Trump, we've closed the border. We have illegals committing all kinds of crimes. We have sanctuary cities that the left has established. In Maryland, of course, and I met Patty Morin, whose daughter was brutally killed. Rachel, met her a couple of times. Here you have Van Hollen spending all his time focusing on bringing back someone who was with MS-13. They want to state he wasn't MS-13. Well, birds of a feather flock together. They were all together. And he's also got a record for beating up women. And so he gets deported. He's here illegally. We have a United States senator and a bunch of knuckleheads in the House that now say their main priority is bringing back someone. Maybe he's not a terrorist, but he's a potential terrorist. He's a terrorist watch list person. They want to bring him back. You saw the El Salvadorian president. He laughed. He said, why in the hell would I bring back a potential terrorist back to the United States when his home country is El Salvador? the Democrats, once again, are showing how out of touch they are and where their priorities are not in line with 95% of American revenue.
And you referenced the fact that we've now learned that his wife had actually filed for a protective order against him for abuse. So let's move to the business of the day that's happening in Washington. So President Trump is now considering raising the corporate tax rate and creating a 40% tax bracket for millionaires in order to pay for all the desired tax cuts. This includes taxes on tips, overtime, Social Security. Congressman, where are we right now? Because when you start to talk about raising the corporate tax rate, I'm not saying you, but those that are maybe suggesting it, your colleagues, or maybe it is you, I don't know, let's find out. But or you start to talk about, raising taxes on millionaires, those sound like Democratic talking points.
Well, it sounds like all of America talking points, and I don't mean to play word games here. And I actually did suggest it a number of months back.
Which one, the corporate tax rate or the
wealthy, the high-end income rate? Okay. Of course, it was at 39.6. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act under President Trump brought it to 37 just on income levels over $750,000, I think it is. So by bringing it from the 37 as we're redoing the tax plan to perhaps 38.6, right? It would still be 1% less than it was before, right? And by the way, if the Democrats are voting against this, the Democrats are all for tax rate increases for low income, middle income, high income, corporate, businesses, you name it. Getting rid of the bonus depreciation and everything else. So we're fighting for small business. We're fighting for all of America and for the job creators that might be in those categories. So if you were to bring it up at one point, it brings about $15 billion in revenues, right, without any elasticity, which could take place. So if it did come up to 39, it's almost $25 billion. The president is determined not to have a standard, if you will, Republican, and this is my view from what I based upon him. I'm not putting words in his mouth. A standard Republican-style budget. What he wants to see is something that is in the interest of all of America, middle-income America, small business, and by the way, we would be talking about an exemption for pass-through small businesses, so they would not be paying at the higher rate as they do now at their income level rate.
Mark, I want to get your reaction to that, because especially from the small business side, what kind of effect do you think that would have?
Well, I mean, they're going to have lesser profits. They're then going to hire fewer people. The people they have employed, their wage gains and wage growth is going to slow. So there's certainly an impact there. And what I'll say, Congressman, is that since the Trump tax cuts went into place, our tax revenues as a country are 50% higher than they were in 2016, pre-Trump tax cuts. So the lower brackets have led to faster economic growth, have increased the tax base, and a lower percentage on a much, much, much larger tax base has really helped to drive additional tax revenue for our government. Do we really need to give the government more?
No. All absolutely true. Revenues went through the roof, 8%, 9% growth. I was former revenue secretary in Pennsylvania. I mean, that's just phenomenal. No question. Everything you stated, we really have a savings problem, not a revenue problem. If, however, we do need to, in reconciliation, balance the fiscal situation, and by doing so will allow for some of those promises that the president did make. Look, the bottom line with taxes is we need to be competitive, not necessarily low, certainly not high, but competitive, and competitive with the rest of the world. That's why the corporate tax rate is very important, being at 21%. I mean, you got Ireland at 12%. I mean, we're in the middle of the pack, barely, where other countries have gotten more competitive. So you're absolutely right. Wherever that max min is for generating the highest level of revenues, it's something under consideration. It's certainly not typical. Yeah. I understand. So we're going to see how we can fit it all together, and we need to do it. By the way, we need to get this done, and if not by Memorial Day, certainly by 4th of July.
I was just going to ask you, what do you think the time frame is, and is President Trump going to get his big, beautiful bill?
He's going to get his big, beautiful bill if I can help it, and if well, it actually needs all of us to help it along,
it does.
And we will. We feel good about it. It's some nuances here. You know, those nuances can be a little bit tricky, but we'll pull it together.
Certainly, Congressman Dan Muser, it's always great to see you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks again for coming by.
Did he ever say anything to you and your family about your loss? To ever call you? Ever take the time to be with you?
No, actually, I'm very angry. I'm actually outraged, but I'm too sad at the moment to show anger at the same time. He did not call our family. He did not give condolences. There was no action on the Democratic Party in any way, from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Mayorkas, anyone here in Maryland, none of the senators did anything to help search for the murderer of my daughter.
This is why Americans voted for change, because while Biden did a whole lot of nothing other than opening up the borders and allowing millions of people to cross our borders illegally into the United States, it's just disgusting.
President Trump set on fixing all of that horror. This morning, the president posting on Truth Social in part, quote, "Sorry, but it's my job to get these killers and thugs out of here. That's what I got elected to do. MAGA."
We're joined by the sheriff of Harford County, Maryland, where Rachel Marin lived. Welcome, Sheriff Jeff Gaylor. Sheriff, thanks so much for joining us. You've seen what's played out in the last couple of days. Give us your perspective.
Well, we concluded the trial here this week. Our state's attorney did a great job presenting that case, and a 46-minute deliberation by the jury put that killer behind bars. I don't want him going back to El Salvador. I want him to die in a Maryland prison. We don't have the death penalty here, but I want him to die in a Maryland prison that he came here and committed this horrific act. But what do we see? We see Senator Van Hollen flying to El Salvador to bring an MS-13 member back. You think it can't get more insane, but this is the state of Maryland, and obviously it can. We don't want him to bring him back. If he came into my jail, we want him screened. MS-13 ties, we want to deport him, and that's where he is. And I'm glad I heard just before we went on air that he did not get an opportunity to meet with this prisoner, that he was turned down by El Salvador's president or vice president, the senator was.
Sheriff, this is a little not directly in what you do for a living, protecting the people of your region, but what do you make of this effort by some of the media and the Democrats like Van Hollen to portray this illegal migrant, this gangbanger, wife beater, portray him as just a man from Maryland, a husband?
Well, what we've seen, yeah. Of course, are we surprised by what the mainstream media, the far left media will report? They'll report anything that serves their own purposes, but it makes no sense to me. Public safety. There was a recent poll here in Maryland. 65% of Democrats want us working with our federal partners. They want immigration enforcement. And that's the majority of the Democrat Party. And even their leaders, if you want to call them that, even their leaders fail to live up to their oath of office and want to stand up and defend criminals instead of our citizens here in this country. It's insanity is the only way you can look at it.
Sheriff, kind of a two-part question. Have you ever had Senator Van Hollen come do a ride-along, go out with your deputies and whatnot to see what's happening on the streets? And the second part is, when you hear that it's MS-13, what does that tell law enforcement? What does that tell people with experience? What kind of person is this if they're part of that gang?
Well, the first answer is absolutely not. No, he hasn't been up, but I'll be happy to invite him. If he wants to come someplace, see a jail. I oversee the jail. We have a 287G partnership with ICE to deport people just like this, people who are criminal offenders in the country illegally. We try to deport them working with our federal partners instead of opening the door and letting them back out into our community. And what do we know about MS-13? They're one of the most violent gangs on the planet. And again, here in my county, Rachel Marin's tragic case happened, but we also had the case of Kayla Hamilton the year before, and she was killed at the hands of an MS-13 member, also in this country, also from El Salvador. It's our community shocked by two horrific murders of two women, and we're not unique. Like in Riley's case, we're not unique to what's happening around this country. We need to look out for the American citizens and the protection of them over top of criminal illegal aliens.
Jeff Gaylor, Sheriff Jeff Gaylor. Sir, you're welcome back here anytime, and thank you for everything.
Thank you for your time.
The housing market is flashing red. Adjustable rate mortgages, the kind that helped blow up the economy in 2008, are now being used at the highest rate in over 2 years. Why? Well, mortgage rates just spiked again, up 20 basis points in a week. New single-family homes for sale in the U.S. surging to 500,000 in February, reaching the highest since November of 2007. But even with more homes for sale, buyers are pulling back. Spring is supposed to be real estate's boom season, but Anthony Pompliano, you say that we have a crisis on our hands. We need to treat it like one. What do you think the path forward is?
There's 4 data points that really show this. The median asking home price is up 6% to $424,000. That's $50,000 increase since the start of the year. The median sale price in America is up 3% to $383,000. But I think even more importantly, the typical home buyer monthly mortgage payment is up 5% year over year to $2,800 per month. And so if you think about those numbers, basically what you have is you have homes becoming more expensive. You have debt becoming more expensive. We're not building enough homes. And so naturally you have this squeeze that's occurring. But people also forget at that same time you have real wages falling. And so people basically can't figure out how to buy a home or keep up with what is ultimately the real inflation that they're experiencing. And so the reason why I say it's a national emergency is because the federal government really has to step in here. And if you go and you look at the housing problem, we can't build houses in America, not because of the federal government. It's because we're being held hostage by local city councils that are basically, parading around or masquerading around as politicians. But at the end of the day, what do they know about housing zoning? What do they know about housing rules?
What do you mean when you say you want the government to get into it?
I think that the federal government
made a mess of it.
I think that the federal government should step in and say that we are going to create either some sort of sandbox, some sort of safe zone, or we are going to actually put some sort of guidance out for these city councils. Because what ends up happening is if you want home prices to stop going up so fast, build more housing. But what you can't do is you can't have people who they are not experienced and frankly, they have a lot of times very big conflicts, right? If you go to the local city council, who sits on the city council? Usually people who are real estate developers or are sitting there, they own real estate in the jurisdiction. There's tons of conflicts of interest. And so if you want the housing rules to actually change,
just crooks.
If you want those housing rules to change, what you have to do is you have to create some sort of guidance. And so the local rules that are in place right now are not taking into account the fact that there is a national emergency in terms of housing prices. And so let's have some sort of framework that we can go and actually implement and allow people to build houses in America so that these house prices stop going up and making it unaffordable.
It's not an emergency to keep home prices propped up, though. I mean, if you want to make housing affordable, it means that prices need to come down. And nobody will admit that the inflated value of the home that you bought, wherever it may be, because literally every home on a coast is, despite the wildly out of control insurance costs, is overvalued. And so you can't tell the American people, well, you know, when you go to sell your house, you might not be able to get a premium for it. Sorry. But there's no emergency there. It's just
high prices and mortgage rates, and you put those all together, and we've got a disaster. I think President Trump wants to work on it, but I also want to talk about on the mortgage side how we got here, because over the course of the last 4 years under Joe Biden, the interest rate when he was inaugurated on the 30-year fix was 2.77%. It rose to 6.77% by July 18th of 24. It went back down in September of 24 to 6.08, but we've been bouncing around in these high ranges, making that prohibitive too for quite some time. That was inflation and the Fed.
But it was 7% last week, according to Mortgage Rate Daily.
Oh, no, I'm not denying it's not high.
Because people were dumping U.S. Treasuries. Now, the yields have eased on the 10-year Treasury, thank God. But again, if you create a Treasury crisis and a U.S. debt crisis, that impacts home buyers.
So we've got supply problem, we've got interest rate problem, we've got a big mess. And Donald Trump has made home building and housing a priority through one of his executive orders. But you're right, Anthony, it is a problem at the local level, and that is quite a mess to weed through. But we're going to follow it.
Iran wants to deal with us, but they don't know how. They really don't know how. We had a meeting with them on Saturday. We have another meeting scheduled next Saturday. I said, that's a long time. You know, that's a long time. So I think that might be tapping us along. But Iran has to get rid of the concept of a nuclear weapon. They cannot have a nuclear weapon. He can't have a nuclear weapon. Nobody can have. We can't have anybody having nuclear weapons, you know. We can't have nuclear weapons. And I think they're tapping us along because we're so used to dealing with stupid people in this country. And I had Iran perfect. You had no attacks. You would have never had October 7 in Israel, the attack by Hamas, because Iran was broke. They were stone cold broke when I was president.
President Trump with reporters yesterday in the Oval Office about Iran's nuclear ambitions. U.S. negotiators meeting with Iranian officials over the weekend on Saturday in Oman, with more talks scheduled in Italy this upcoming Saturday. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane. General, always a pleasure. Thank you for being here. Can you assess what you heard from the Oman meeting and what you would expect from this upcoming Italy meeting on Saturday?
Yeah, well, I think my expectations are pretty low. Iran is summarily rejecting any thought of dismantling the program themselves. I mean, what they want to do is move back to what they would define as commercial civilian nuclear power enrichment program, which is low-grade enriched uranium. Back when we had the nuclear deal with the Obama administration is what they're really talking about. And Maria, that's a distinction now without a difference. In other words, civilian nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Because Iran has technology that has advanced, as well as their engineers. They have developed advanced centrifuges. They can make enriched uranium very rapidly. They're right now capable of producing 6 nuclear weapons within a number of weeks because they've already developed the enriched uranium to the levels needed for that weaponization. So we have to understand who Iran is today. And that's why that makes no sense to try to form that difference, because it isn't a difference. And listen, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu have all the cards here. Iran is relatively defenseless against an attack. They know it. They haven't retaliated against Israel since the October attack, which was devastating on them. They removed their defenses and much of their rockets and missiles. We've got maximum sanctions hanging over their head here. Their economy is in the tank. If they don't want to dismantle their program and get sanction relief and be welcomed in as a legitimate country, if they're going to stop their malign behavior in the region, then we execute the ultimatum that President Trump has laid down in front of them. And that would be an Israeli-led, U.S.-supported attack. It's something the president doesn't want to do, but Iran looks like they're going to likely force his hand. That's kind of where we are, Maria.
So do you think that, in fact, they would pull the trigger, the Israelis, to decimate the Iranian buildup of nuclear weapons?
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said that, and President Trump has said it himself. So that is the ultimatum. The Iranians clearly understand that. And look, we know what they're going to do. They'll say, okay, we'll go back to those low-level restrictions. We'll remove centrifuges. We'll do this. We'll do that. And then what will happen? They'll go to a secret site and begin to rapidly enrich their uranium to weaponization. That's what they'll do. That's the reality of it. That's why they have to dismantle the program with independent inspectors that go anywhere, anytime, and do it by a date certain. Without that rigor there, Iran will eventually get a nuclear weapon. So we are where we are today. And I think we kind of expected Iran to do this. I think that's why the Ayatollah agreed to the negotiations. He was opposed initially because what does he want? He wants sanction relief. He wants Iranian assets that are frozen to stop being frozen. He can get that money back. That's what this is really all about for them.
What's your sense of the capabilities of the Iranian regime? Because this weekend I spoke with Reza Pahlavi, the former crown prince of Iran, who said, look, and you've said this in the past, I think as well, General, the Iranian leadership is not, as strong as they let on. And most people know it. I mean, after all of these attacks on the Houthis, do you think the leadership there, the Khomeini, is getting the message that the U.S. has the capability to stop them?
he knows full well the U.S. has the capability with the Israelis to take down their nuclear enterprise. He is likely willing to face that as long as his regime survives. That's what this is all about. That's why he wants a nuclear weapon. It guarantees the preservation of his regime. That's where these guys are at.
Yeah.
But they are in the most weakened position they have been in 44 years. A lot of their elites and their middle class have been hurt seriously by sanctions. And they are fed up with this regime taking all of the money and spending it on proxy warfare, which is what they've been doing. So, but we've been looking for this regime to collapse by an overthrow and a revolution for years, and it hasn't happened. We can't put a bet on that somehow that's going to happen. What we have to control what we can control, and that is make certain that they don't get a nuclear weapon.
Yep, absolutely. Let me move on to China, sir, because China is suspending the export of critical minerals and magnets to the United States. As you know, these minerals are critical and central to automakers, aerospace manufacturers, military, semiconductor companies, military contractors. This morning, China also ordered its airline carriers to stop accepting deliveries from Boeing. This is all in response to President Trump's tariffs on China. What do you make of this? How serious is this? And is this a national security threat that we can overcome?
Well, it is a serious national security implication here because in our airplanes and our submarines, in all of our sophisticated weapon systems, in radar, sonars, there are magnets and rare minerals, and China owns 90% of the world's supply here. So it will have an impact. Now, our defense industry has some stockpile, and the Pentagon has some stockpile, but both of those are limited. I don't know how long because that's classified, but I would suspect months as opposed to years. So it eventually will have an impact on weapons that are being developed and future weapons. Certainly the force that's out there, it's not going to have any impact on them. But that's the reality of what we're facing. Yes, it does have a serious national security implication.
All right. Well, this is the way, they're going to push back the way they're going to push back, right, General? I mean, they're going to do whatever they can do to fight President Trump's tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in phases here which will lead to some kind of negotiation because obviously we have tools we're using against China and China has tools they're using against us.
Right.
What that seems to me is a pathway to some kind of negotiated settlement at some point. I think that's what's in the back of the president and his team's mind here as they look at this issue.
All right, we will leave it there. General, thanks very much for talking with me this morning and getting through that. I see that you have struggled with your voice. I hope you can get some water there. We appreciate your time.
The Trump administration accused New York Attorney General Letitia James of mortgage fraud. They've made a criminal referral to the Justice Department seeking federal prosecution. The Attorney General's office responded saying this: Attorney General James is focused every single day on protecting New Yorkers, especially as this administration weaponizes the federal government against the rule of law and the Constitution. She will not be intimidated by bullies, no matter who they are. Andrew Cherkasky joins me now. Is Trump playing his own form of lawfare in New York?
Well, I think they say people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones.
Right.
It's beyond ironic that the allegations that she's now facing stem from the exact same types of mortgage fraud or loan type fraud that Trump went through that incredible civil trial on, where he defended himself, and he said that those banks and those financial institutions that he dealt with had acknowledged and had their own fair opportunity to look into and do their research. The allegations against Letitia James are not quite as friendly to her, and they look quite damning. Now, the DOJ is going to start their investigation. That's going to take some time. I don't know how many resources they're going to put behind that, but if these allegations that are being put forth turn out to be true, she is going to be facing the same sort of bankruptcy and turning over of her assets to the state that Donald Trump had to through that trial.
Well, I've got a sort of a follow-on question for this. Do you remember the February meeting between Trump and Governor Hochul, New York Governor Hochul, over New York City's congestion tax? Well, the New York Post is reporting that Hochul threatened Trump over the measure. She referred to the appeal against his civil fraud case and told him, "I control the judges." Hochul is denying that report. But my question is Trump still subject to that $480 million penalty? How's that going to play out?
Well, that appeal has been going on forever at this point. It is well beyond the normal amount of time that the appeal courts look at a case like this, and he is incurring interest in the amount of over $100,000 a day for that bond that he had to put up while the court slowly goes through it. Now, the Governor Hochul piece of it is, as of right now, kind of a he said, she said type of situation where she's denying that she said these things, but they sound like things that could be said, where she's leveraging her powers in the state to try to gain some sort of power or advantage in the negotiations that she's got with the White House. All of that's going to play out. I don't see that being a criminal matter at this moment. It's more political infighting between them, but I wouldn't poke the bear, and that bear is Donald Trump.
But I want to know, is Donald Trump ever going to have to pay $480 million?
Well, we're waiting to see what the appeal court says. But that's just the first layer.
But as we wait, he's getting charged $100,000 a day in interest or something?
And if he wins, he can get that money essentially back. Not so much the interest, not so much fees. Ultimately, it could cost him over millions of dollars. Even if he wins, then he might have to sue, maybe get that money back. But this is an extraordinarily expensive venture for him, even if he should righteously win. It will have cost him dearly.
I think that $480 million penalty was one of the reasons he won the election.
Of course.
You know, because that wasn't right. Andrew, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Stop the scam. After DOJ revealed nearly half of the Social Security Administration's daily calls are from scammers trying to steal the benefits, the agency is finally cracking down. Starting today, all phone claims get screened for fraud. Red flags, you've got to show up in person and you're showing ID. Showing ID, what a concept here, so novel. But Musk says that it's common sense approaches like this that will save billions of dollars and make sure that Social Security is here for future generations.
How do you reassure people that what you all are doing is not going to affect their benefits?
No, in fact, what we're doing will help their benefits. Legitimate people, as a result of the work of DOJ, will receive more Social Security, not less. I want to emphasize that. As a result of the work of DOJ, legitimate recipients of Social Security will receive more money, not less.
But is fighting fraud enough? We're staring down a $78 trillion shortfall in Social Security and Medicare. That's the combined net worth of over 200 Elon Musks. So Washington can't just patch the holes here. It's got to right the whole ship. Congressman, I want to come to you to get your thoughts on this. And we have a full screen here that we can show to everyone to just illustrate how Medicaid costs have absolutely skyrocketed since the year 2000. Going through 2023, they have gone up by more than 300%, roughly 350%. We're talking around from roughly $200 billion in 2000 to over $900 billion in 2023. We cannot continue on this path, but I'm wondering, how can members of the GOP talk about reining this in without being accused of cutting everyone's benefits? Because that's what they're being accused of.
Yeah, and it's no matter what they do, they're going to be accused of that. And they understand there's a double standard here. So let me just tell you, so when I was chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in President Trump's first term, someone tried to steal my Social Security benefits. Wow. And we have oversight over Social Security. And we had someone trying to scam that. This is real. So the short answer is every dollar that Elon Musk can save, integrity and so is helpful. Yeah, these are huge numbers. I think at the end of the day, it's gonna take a bipartisan effort to save Social Security. I think you're going to have to, there's some common sense things that can be done to slowly raise the full retirement age, means test for the wealthy, get a cost of living that relates to seniors, not 20-somethings. There's some really good things, but it would help to start with some integrity, you know what I mean, within the Social Security Administration. I think that's the value of what Elon Musk is doing.
I think you're absolutely right. And it shocks me when just we take the waste and the fraud, and you've got Democrats who don't want to get rid of that, can't agree to that. But also ideologically, Congressman, we've got a major issue because it's the Democrats versus the Republicans that want to expand these programs. President Obama did it with Medicaid. President Biden did it. The reason those numbers jump so much is because you've got illegal immigrants that shouldn't be on the program. Dagan's highlighted the fact that you've got states that don't do income checks. They just let people go on the rolls. And the expansion of that, when you give things, then it becomes very hard to take them away from people. And they're out there. Pandora's box has been opened. And now you see the Republican senators who feel conflicted because they're afraid. They're afraid if they get on board with Mike Johnson and these kinds of spending cuts, people are going to say exactly what Lydia said. You're throwing Granny off the cliff. I'm not going to vote for you.
Yeah, and it's there and it's real, and people back home buy it. But I think more and more Republicans, you know, are willing to lean into and explain, like get out there on the campaign trail and explain why every dollar they save strengthens it.
Right.
You know, for the poor, Medicaid's a great example. We're under Obamacare. You incentivize the wealth or the more well-to-do who aren't working, mainly men, but you starve the single mom who's giving birth or senior in a nursing home. That makes no sense at all. Republicans, to their credit, want to change the way we provide that safety net in a good way.
Well, but you know, there are some Republicans who are not so strong on this right now. Like they are, the spine is, what was the line? It's the spine like a chocolate eclair. I think that's what Roosevelt said about McKinley or something like that. But that's what some of these guys operate like. You know, the senator from Missouri, Josh Hawley. He's out there, you know, and there's a lot of things I like about him, but man, he does not want to talk Medicaid. And I'm looking at some of these numbers, and these were actually, I didn't know, you've got 21 million able-bodied people on Medicaid, okay? Now, many of them probably need that, but you've got 6 in 10 of those people who don't earn any income. How can the vision of a Republican Party be, I want to protect a system that it seems to be better at keeping able-bodied people out of work than fostering them getting into work? Like if you don't believe in work as a Republican, you should find a different party or a different profession because you are not helping the American people. So I wish there were more Republicans who had a little more spine in articulating that philosophical message about work and the role of government in that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, there have been efforts to introduce the work requirements. I think it was a couple of years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, Congressman, but there were talks about asking people that were receiving Medicaid to work 20 hours a week, just 20. And the concessions, the exemptions that the GOP was offering were quite generous. If you were taking care of children, if you're taking care of an elderly person, if you were pregnant, you could get an exemption from this 20-hour per week work requirement. And yet it didn't come to fruition.
It's so reasonable. And in 2019, we did welfare reform 2.0 under President Trump, got it out of the House, work requirement for everyone in helping people get into that job. That's what Republicans stand for.
And Medicaid was expanded under Obamacare. And that's how working age, able-bodied men were able to get on it. And it needs to be dialed back. It's 60% bigger in terms of the spend than it was in 2019. It needs to be dialed back to what it originally was, but left, right, and center, they won't take a dime away from anybody. And there's a loophole that the states use, like California, where they raise taxes on the health care providers. Then they take the money and spend it on Medicaid as if it's an organic spend, and then they get a 60 cents for every dollar offset from the federal government. And California is using that to provide Medicaid for illegal aliens and rich people. And it is against the law to provide Medicaid for illegal aliens, but Gavin Newsom somehow is doing it and getting away with it because they won't close that loophole at the federal level.
As long as you see Medicaid not going to where the people are, but where the money is, you know, the matching, you're going to have those types of abuses.
Well, now the fraud program goes into place. People might have to show up in the office to make a claim. So we'll see how that goes.